Hey guys, this is Asad, picking up where we left off last time with the hand on table 2 here, where I called a 3-bet with 6-7 of spades, and our opponent bet twice in a 3-bet pot, and we jammed the turn. Which, when I discussed my thought process behind both calling the flop and jamming the turn last time, I hadn't really considered the option of calling the turn, but I talked strategy about this hand actually with a friend of mine, and we sort of did some dissecting of ranges, both our range as the button and our opponent's range as the big blind three better, and sort of came to the conclusion that it wouldn't be so bad to call the turn here, expecting to be bluffed on the cards that improve our range, and expect not really to be bluffed on cards that miss us completely, with the exception of like a king, an offsuit king. Other cards that he would probably bluff would be maybe a queen, potentially a queen, although I don't think that always gets bluffed since it does hit our range decently well. Offsuit ace probably gets bluffed, but we also have to understand that ace of spades, queen of spades, king of spades are all very likely to get bluffed. And by the same logic, when we call the turn on a jack here, we have a decent number of hands that have good enough showdown value to call twice. So I wouldn't really expect like a 2, 3, 4 to be bluffed very often. Obviously, the 4 gives us, makes us, but I just wanted to take a minute to talk about some alternative options in this hand that we stopped on last time, just because it does feel a little bit weird to call twice with 7 high. But it's also important to keep in mind that even though we're calling with 7 high on the turn, we have some pretty good implied odds to be bluffed, and obviously we have so much equity that we'll be able to call down a lot of rivers anyway. And there's also some ways that he could potentially check fold a better hand, for instance on a 7, but I guess that's a pretty rare scenario. So anyway, I'm going to pick up right where we left off, and at this point, just to do a little bit of a refresher, it seems like I've made a little bit of a comeback, and I did say that I wanted to talk about emotional swings and general momentum this week. So I am going to discuss that a little bit as it comes up, but I'm going to roll the footage, and it looks like we're about halfway through, so should make for 2 parts. So it looks like he hasn't really been opening up his button open percentage, and is opening pretty tight. 76 on the left and 83 on the right. I mean, he's averaging about 80% of buttons. So I need to keep that in mind. It's going to affect a lot of things. It's going to affect my defending range. It's going to affect my turn calling range, my river calling range. Table 1, we bet twice with 7-10, and we get a pretty good river for us. A river that I think improves our range much more so than his, since we are opening. I guess we're not opening very many buttons in this match either, which I find kind of surprising. I played this pretty long time ago, and I'm opening much closer to 100% of buttons nowadays, but opening 82% of buttons means a couple things for our range on table 1. It means that our c-betting range is going to be inherently stronger, which, even though this is a turn that gets barreled probably 100% of the time with air, it does ultimately make our turn barreling frequency or turn barreling range stronger. So what should he expect us to bet the turn with? Probably any spade. Um, should expect us to bet it also with any ace or king, but obviously aces and kings probably do not bet river for value. Probably shouldn't bet river for value. So once I get here with a hand that's so far down in my range, I think it's pretty mandatory to bluff. And I don't expect to get called by a king. I also don't expect to really get called very often by an ace that check called that flop, which should be a decent number of them. It's pretty hard for him to have a spade in general, just based on the way the board texture is. Table 2, check called twice with 9-8 on the ace-ace 9-8. Can't really justify calling the river. I think that he's range aware enough to be value betting a 10 on the river. The board was ace-ace 8-9-10. He'll value bet a 10 on the river. He'll have all combos of 6-7, Jack-7, and Queen-Jack that I won't have. He'll obviously be betting any ace for value, and I'll also have plenty of aces there that I check call twice, so I don't expect him to really be bluffing too often. Table 1, we bet twice with Jack-5 of spades, and we get a pretty good river. One that we can be perceived to value bet thinly on, like any 8, and obviously backdoor flush favors us. The 9 is pretty good since a lot of our barreling range is going to contain a 9, and we'll obviously be value betting a 9. So I folded Jack-8 off to his 3x open, which feels kind of dirty now, but if he's only opening 80% of buttons, then it's pretty important to tighten up my defending range. But wouldn't mind 3-betting that hand. I think it's pretty much towards the very tip top of my folding range, even against somebody who's opening only 80% of buttons. 8s, I decided to flat, which I like given the stats that I'm looking at. He's only 4-betting. I mean, this is a small sample, but we haven't really seen him 4-bet, I guess. Maybe like 3.5%, 4%. Which, in order to 3-bet 8s, you'd need a pretty aggressive preflop dynamic that would give you a lot of fold equity over 4-bets. So I like flat here, and I also like check calling the flop. Although I do think this is a board that gets barreled pretty often, I also think it's a board where he wouldn't really be c-betting 9x. So his betting range is pretty polarized to king x or better, and draws. So yes, we're gonna be perceived to have 10-jack and queen-jack and those types of hands a lot. Will he try to barrel us just based on that fact? I'm not really sure. So I think the only way to find out is to just check call on the river here. I think we can just check and try to get to showdown pretty safely. I expect us to win there really often when he doesn't bet the turn. I'd like to see myself 3-bet the 8-9. Although he's not folding the 3-bet too often, which makes sense. One thing that people often forget is that when somebody's opening pretty tight and their range is generally stronger, they're going to be calling more 3-bets. So table 2, we pick up ace-king, and I think this is a great time to pick up a hand in order to 4-bet. It looks like we're also not 4-betting too often, but maybe slightly more than him. But just general dynamic-wise and game flow-wise, I think when somebody starts a match winning and then loses a bunch back, they're going to be generally more inclined to try to win the money back faster than they need to, when in reality the way that they're going to win the money back the fastest is by playing their A game. So I think the general most common response is to 3-bet more. I'm not sure about this size. It seems like a size that he hasn't always been doing, or I can't remember him doing. But he's 3-betting quite a bit, so I think this should be, I mean, obviously this is going to be an easy 4-bet. He snap shoves with Jack 2 suited. So I want to stop and actually talk about this briefly. It's a spot that is a perfect example of a shift in momentum based on the results of a pretty uncommon situation. And this happens all the time in poker, obviously. You have to learn how to deal with it the right way. And by that I mean how your opponent's play is going to change and how you should adjust your play accordingly. Because if you don't do that, then you won't use the results against him in the right way. The most important and probably most overlooked part of this situation is that we gain a huge informational advantage. Essentially, our hand tells him nothing, but his hand tells us a ton. So let's break this down. What did he learn from us? He learned that we 4-bet called off ace king at 100 big blinds, which is probably like the most standard play in poker. But we actually learned a whole lot from him. And I want to break that down into two categories, which are technical and mental. So first, technically, we learned that he 3-bets Jack 2 suited versus a min raise. So what does this do? It informs our decisions when he flats, which means he'll show up with less suited hands in single raise pots. So this is relevant to our c-betting strategy, our barreling strategy. It's relevant to dealing with flop check raises and turn and river follow throughs and so on and so forth. It also shows us that he's going to show up with more suited hands in 3-bet pots, which should make us less likely to fight back on boards like this one, like 6, 8, 10 with 2 diamonds. We're going to be a little more hard pressed to bluff catch on runoffs like this. It's more difficult to call down. But what it does do, it makes it more appealing for us to then barrel 3 streets when he flats. Okay, mentally, what did we learn mentally? We learned that he 5-bet bluffed all in with Jack 2 suited, but it's a hand that he obviously considers, a bluff. He made this bluff based on what? I would assume that he didn't 3-bet this hand with the intention of 5-bet bluffing all in. Obviously because there are much better hands to do this with. So I guess that tells us a couple things. Firstly, he's probably making his decisions to 5-bet bluff after 3-betting, which might mean that he makes his decisions based on gut feeling as opposed to like range mechanics. It also may be the case that he's more likely to let emotions play a role in his decision making, like for instance tilt. We know he just lost a buy-in on table 2 and alluded in chat to having his last 3 big pairs cracked. So that could definitely weigh into his decision in the moment. So now we've gathered all this info, and we want to essentially use it to our advantage for the rest of the match, because ultimately this hand is over. So this hand is now hand history, and we have to move forward if we want to, progress positively and learn from the experience. So how do I expect his range to change? I give him credit to notice that his image is sort of shot, and by that logic he should be less likely to 5-bet bluff again, because even though he was positively reinforced by winning the hand, he still remembers the fact that his read was wrong and had to rely on sucking out. So he should be image aware enough not to necessarily want to fuck up again. What's his perception of how we're going to respond? I think commonly people in his shoes will perceive our 4-bet range to become wider for value. Pretty correctly, I think. I mean, our 4-bet range should become wider for value, but while most people would view this situation from like a first level platform and be averse to 4-bet bluffing him, I think it's actually the best counter adjustment, at least immediately. to his like super wide 3-bet frequency and tendency to 5-bet bluff. Like he's not going to want to 3-bet and then be put in a situation where he has to make a decision that could be wrong again. And he's also not tilted anymore, just from winning the hand. So I would like to see myself 4-betting more right after this hand.